And hello, today we'll be looking at percentages. So you should already have looked at natural numbers, integers, and decimals, and should be comfortable with all of them before looking at percentages. Just a little bit of history on percentages, I guess. The word cent. If you actually think of cent, where might you have heard it before? Well, the obvious one would be the currency, 1 cent, like a euro. So if you have 100 cents, you have a euro. You might have heard of century if you're doing history. So a century is 100 years. Centimeter, if you're doing science or construction or something like that, you might have recalled that there's 100 centimeters in a meter. Or another one would be a centipede, and a centipede supposedly has around 100 legs. So you'll notice I mentioned 100 a lot there, and that's because cent is actually Latin for 100. So why do we care? Percentages, well, the word percent means per 100, or out of every 100. So percent just means per 100. And that's very, very important to remember. We're looking at things per 100. And the symbol we use is this little symbol. So it's like a 0 with a line and another 0. And that's used to represent percentages. So let's say 10% means, so this is percent, this little symbol. 10% means 10 out of every 100. So there's a little example. There's a diagram, shows 100 squares. 25 of the squares are colored red, these ones here. So that means 25% of the squares are red. So that's saying 25 out of 100 for every 100 are red. And then 10% of the diagram is colored green. So how many of those squares are colored green? Well, it'd be 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 out of the whole 100 would be green. So percentages means things per 100. Now, a lot of the time we're converting fractions, decimals, to percentages. So how would we do that? Well, 2/5 as a percentage. How would we do that? Now remember, percentages are per 100. So this is 2/5. Remember what it represents. If we divided one whole unit into 5 bits, 2 of those bits are represented. So it's 2 out of 5. What about per something out of 100? Well, that's the exact same thing as something over 100. So how do we find 2/5 is equal to something over 100? Well, this is going back to equivalent fractions. That's why I said you should be comfortable with fractions before this lesson. How will we do that? Well, again, I've said this a few times. I want the denominator to become 100. I can multiply or divide it by anything I like. So what am I going to multiply 5 by to get to 100? Well, 5 times 20 is 100. If I multiply the bottom by 20, I multiply the top by 20. So 2 by 20, well, that's going to be 40. So 2/5 is equal to 40 over 100. Now, why did we do this? 40 over 100 is 40 out of the 100, which is the same thing as 40 per 100, or 40%. So if you want to convert fraction, you have to put it over 100, and then you get it as percentage. Now, nice little trick. You convert a fraction in one step by multiplying it by 100 over 1. So if I had 2/5, if I just multiply it by 100, I'll get my percentage value. So what's 2/5 multiplied by 100 over 1? Well, that'll be 200 over 5. 200 over 5 is just 40, so that'll be 40%. So nice little trick. If you ever want to just convert 2/5, you're just saying multiply it by 100, and that'll give you your percentage value. It works for all fractions. If you want to get a percentage, multiply it by 100. Nice thing to remember would be this. You can remember this step. This is a little bit longer, but if you just remember this, the multiply by 100, you'll get it percentage wise. Okay, what about decimals? 0.65 as a percentage. Well, think about it. 1, so 1.0, 1 represents 100%. So in our fractions case, if I had 5 over 5, that would be 100%. Yeah? So 1 is 100. So 6, if I go over 1 to the right, remember what we call it? Tenths, hundreds, thousands, 10,000s. So this, if I had 0.6, it would be tenths. So it would be 60 out of 100. Now I have 65 out of 100. Yeah? So 0.65, I want to find as a fraction over 100. How would I do that? Well, that's the same thing as just 65 over 100. So 65 over 100, that's just 65%. Now, you can remember this way of, well, I need to convert this decimal into a fraction over 100, and what is it over 100? Or, again, really easy way, just remember this. You convert decimal in one step by multiplying by 100. So what's 0.65 multiplied by 100? 65. So it'll be 65%. So this kind of tells you where this 100 multiplied by 100 comes from. But I would just remember, multiply by 100, if you have a fraction or decimal, that gives you your percentage value. So really important, remember that. Why do we care about percentages? It's usually with discounts. So you see in shops, 10% off or 50% off. And those are usually where we'd see them most commonly. So how would we find this out? Which is worth more? 67% of €570 or 43% of €600? So how do we do it? Well, 67%, remember, is 67 over 100. So what's 67 over 100 of 570? Well, you just multiply them. What's a half of 570? You multiply 570 by a half. What's a third of 570? You multiply 570 by a third. Same thing goes on here. 570 times 67 over 100, and you get around €381 or €382. Then we're going to do the same for the 600. So 43%, that's 43 over 100. 600 multiplied by 43 over 100. You do that into your calculator, or you can do it in your head. That's €258. So that means 67% of 570, that's going to be worth more. So just be careful. See the way 570 is less than 600. That doesn't necessarily mean that this is smaller. You have to be careful. Sometimes your intuition might be wrong. Just some recap questions, as I always do. So I'll give you a second to look at those. Okay, so convert 86% to a fraction. Well, 86% is 86 over 100. 86 per 100. Simplifying now, what number goes into 100 and 86? Well, an obvious one would be 2. I can divide 100 by 2. I can divide 86 by 2. So I get 43 over 50. I don't think I can simplify it anymore. So that would be my final answer. 43 over 50 would be 86% as a fraction. Now, this would be okay as well, but sometimes they want you to simplify it down a little bit more. What is 110% of 50? A little bit of a trickier question. Now, 110% is 100% and another 10%. So what's 100%? Well, that's 50. 100% is equal to 50. So what's 10%? Well, 10% of 50 would be 50 times 10 over 100, because that's the fraction. So that's 5. So what's 110% of 50? Well, that's 50, which is your 100%, plus 5, which is equal to 55. So anything above 100, what you do is you find your 100% first, then you add on whatever is left. So there'll be another 10% added on. So that would be, you have to find your 10% and add that on again.